patent, I mean, get it. If you can get a trademark, get it, because it's going to give you a lot of psychological peace as you go start knocking on doors. And then surround yourself with people who can help you.
I was really excited to get you on, David. You've hit a lot of points that our audience loves. You've got an artistic background. You've got an invention background. So, of course, there's intellectual properties involved in that. And you're part of an organization, so you're giving back to society. So you've really got a whole lot going on. Plus, you're an author for the second time. You're
Oh, I tell
definitely
you.
out there making it happen. So very excited. If you don't mind, we'll start right off the bat with a question. In your experience, what breaks when someone begins with purpose before identity, especially in business or leadership?
Yeah, it's funny how so many of these things are tied together, right? Lack of a better term, marbling in a stake. You've got identity and purpose and your why and what lights you up and what you're passionate about and all these kind of things. And Simon Sinek wrote the book Start With Why. Fantastic book. He's a wiser man than I am. And at the same time, there's a few things that I think are just really helpful to consider with regards to the order of things. And I've learned a lot the hard way. When doctors refer to someone with a disorder, they have an eating disorder or mental disorder, it means that there's things out of order or disordered. So I really feel like there's a progression that is super helpful with regards to, okay, here I am right now. I want to head that direction. Here's why. But before that, what bedrock am I standing on? Like, what is the language that describes all of the tools in my belt and the things that make me me in order to then comprehend why I am passionate about something? So I often say, never start with why, start with who. And so I think that identity piece is super important. And again, in our culture, words like authenticity and identity are largely hijacked and misunderstood. And I like to kind of break those down into some more simple words and phrases.
I think I express similar sentiments when somebody talks about it. And of course, just to give a very generic example, when people say this organization's bad, well, that's people, or
Yeah.
Wall Street's bad. Well, those are people. And then, of course, on the individual level, you have the individual person behaving badly. And then maybe it's systemic in the
Well,
organization.
and you know what? And sometimes it's me, right?
Sometimes
Sometimes
it's
I'm
me.
the bad guy, right? So I mean, and most of the time, if I have any problems, it's not somebody else. It's the goofball in the mirror that needs to get things reordered again and find the plumb line. So I love the kind of the genesis of our conversation here. It's yeah.
What I can tell you, I got sober at 31. Sometimes I'll get that forget.
Oh,
It's been a very long time.
you go.
I'm in my 50s now, so I've smelled it since then, but I forgot. I can't even tell you what it tastes like. It's been so long. But I'll tell you this, something that happened. First of all, if somebody has a problem with alcohol, definitely get help because I I'm more proud of my sobriety than even the 8 years I served in the Army, and I'm very proud of that. Believe me, I'm really
Yeah,
proud of it. I'm proud
way to
that
go.
I'm the first person in the family to graduate college.
Should
I'm
be.
very proud of that. But my sobriety still rises above all of those things. And the reason why, David, it changed everything, but it didn't change it immediately. And
Yeah.
it took me 3 years of sobriety. And this is so around 33, 34 was the first time in my life that when I had a problem, I started to look at myself first because I was that guy before David that said, oh, it's these people. It was that bad government or that organization or that ex-girlfriend or that. And finally, it took almost 35 years, David, for me to hold a mirror up to my own face. And I can't tell you how, I'm not going to say everything got great, but it got so much better once I looked for my own fingerprints in the problems of what was going on. Have you always been that self-aware, or did you have some moment that turned you around?
It's funny. I wouldn't say that I have had, like these huge pivotal moments. There's been kind of seasons in life when I've been maybe more aware, and growing and maturing and, my faith is a real big part of my life and so on. And then, I think when things started to kind of really shift as far as being extrinsically motivated and then coming to more of a core sense of who I am and what lights me up and being more intrinsically motivated, is I joined a mastermind group about 7 years ago and just started hanging out with some guys that held up a mirror to me and started asking a lot better questions. And when I started having the courage to answer in a truthful way the things that I kind of dreamt about myself that were real, I had men in my life who said, David, you nailed it. So I started to kind of identify the word identity, those things that were so core to who I was. And it was amazing how the people around me really helped to galvanize those things. And by the way, I think that's such a core tenet to how that stuff is developed, right? You can't just, identity is not something that is completely understood or galvanized or formed in and of yourself, right? We are given our nature, right? We are a created being. I didn't make me. So when I start to identify everything from my skin color to my taste buds to all the different things that make me, we're very hardwired. But those of us who have children know they come out of the gate very different. I've got two, they're 19 and 20. And I mean, from weeks and months old, you can tell how their little spirits are so different, right? I mean, of course, their taste buds and, appearance and stuff is, but their little spirit is so different. And children aren't thinking about identity and authenticity like us sophisticants, right? They're just doing their deal. And so what I think is fascinating is when you finally have the wherewithal and you're surrounded by people that are safe and you start digging into those areas and answering the right questions, to start naming some of those things that make you you, everything from values to convictions to virtues to goosebumps to strengths to passions, all this stuff, you start to identify what? Authenticity, right? Where do we get that word from? Author, right? What has been authored in you? And then when you start operating in alignment with all of that, what do you feel, right? There's a clue there. You start to feel authentic and you have a sense of authority in your life to operate inside of who you are and who you're not. You're not trying to act like your brother or, your best friend or Joe Rogan or, whoever else you admire. You're operating inside of your own authenticity and it feels natural and genuine and probably it just feels right as opposed to when you have not identified those things, you start to feel, I mean, imposter syndrome and anxious and probably depressed after a long time. And, that big question mark just tends to run amok inside of you. So 7 years ago, I started hanging out with some people who were all about growth and identity. And they ended up being the tools I feel like God used to really help shift some things in me.
So with the small children, when they're very small, they have to do what they're told. And then they feel the weight of the parental expectation. You're going to go to college, you're going to go to the military, and then when they break free and they're out of the house, I still think the parents' voices play probably throughout our entire lives, but that begins to wane in influence as we become individual people and at varying stages, which I was obviously a very late learner, very late
Me
bloomer.
too. Yeah. Same
You
here.
know,
And that's for most of us.
I didn't have kids and I thought I needed to. And then I later realized, okay, not everybody has to have kids, but I had that pressure on myself for a long time. But I kept moving. I was in the army, I was all over the place. And I remember some of the instability of my childhood. And I thought, I got to wait until I slow down a little bit because I don't want to put my kid through what I went through. And I guarantee you, David, as you were raising your kids, you really put extra protection trying to prevent some of the things you disliked about your youth. We're always trying to protect them
Oh,
from.
we absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Now, this mentor, if you don't mind, there's a gentleman that you work with. Can you give us just a brief background on him and how you met with him?
Yeah, so Dr. Andy Garrett, he started a program that he calls the True North Blueprint.
Mhm.
And so he was in my mastermind group for years and just, a dear friend, and we work together, still. And we work more with corporations, at kind of a high level with executives and helping them just to start to identify all of these things about themselves so that when they walk into an organization, right, they just are just much more of a whole person as opposed to, kind of doing some weird dance and people pleasing and all that kind of nonsense. And so, yeah, it was funny because he started introducing me to some concepts that I thought were, maybe woo-hoo. And he began to distill that in a way that was very practical, very knowable, very touchable, and so on. And it's, yeah, it just really started to shift some things. And I think the kind of the concept I mentioned of having things out of order, a disorder, I think on most days, right, when I get up in the morning and I understand and afresh, right, because it's a new day It's like, man, this is the summum bonum, the highest good, right? And this is the next thing, and this is the next thing, and this is the next thing. And to kind of have a general sense of, I'm not just getting up in the morning, licking my finger, hoping which way the wind blows, people pleasing, putting out fires, all that kind of stuff, right? Not that I don't slip into that, right? We're not perfect. But the opposite of that licking your finger thing is what? It's I'm getting up in the morning with a real sense of
Oh, yeah.
whose I am and who I am and what direction I'm going and what type of an impact I want to have on other people's. I've predetermined based upon my values, which are very clear to me, kind of the hierarchy of those things, whether it's an obstacle or an opportunity, what I'm going to say yes and no to, and not just have all of these question marks. So the more that you drill in on all of that kind of stuff, you're just removing question marks. And it's a game changer.
To paint a picture of it, one thing I like to ask is, what do you wish the clients knew before they came to you? Like if they got one thing before they picked up the phone and reached out to you guys from assistance, what's the one misconception or idea that you can either build on, clarify, or remove?
So I want to make sure I understand. So if a CEO of a company was calling us for some coaching,
That's
right?
right.
Okay.
That's right. What
If
misconception would you pull out of their mind or something that you would inject?
I think it's fascinating how many people at that level, they're high achievers, right?
Mhm.
They're very, I'm going to climb that hill because it's there. Their personality profiles are just very type A, get after it kind of thing. And here's the funny thing. What I find is most people like that, they present as someone who's incredibly capable and they got that really steely facade going on and everything. But yet, they're some of the most fearful people.
Wow.
They're afraid to be known. They're afraid to be in process. They're afraid to not have the right answers. And so I think there's maybe some insecurity there where I would say, when you surround yourself with, like what we do, right? You're surrounding yourself with people who are just wrapped with curiosity. Like what's going on right now? Like what's going on under the hood today? Like what can we identify that's, happening inside of you? What's going on that you think will never change? Like what's that plumb line inside of your constitution look like? And what are the names that, that identify that? And so I think maybe the misconception is that, someone is going to, and what all we're doing is asking questions, and when they give us an answer, we're asking them to actually define that answer. So no one is telling anybody what to do. No one's giving them a list of things to live up to or some standards that they have got to somehow assimilate to. We're asking you, what are your standards? What do you want to live up to? What do you want? What tools in your belt do you want to employ to navigate these various things? There's no self-help here. This is just identifying all of the riches inside of somebody and letting them operate in that capacity.
I love it, David. React to this if you don't mind. Radical self-awareness, because this goes right into the CEOs, right into the people at the top, because it's the ones that I
Yeah.
know they're absolutely fried. Radical self-awareness as an antidote to burnout.
Yeah. So here's a funny thing, right? Man, I tell you, the days, when I start to, forget, and again, I'm a man of deep faith. When I forget whose I am and whose image I'm made in, and how much, again, one of my values is my faith, right? How much I feel like God walks behind me and beside me and goes before me. That's my number one value. My second value is inspiration. Well, what does that mean? It means to breathe life into somebody. Here's the funny thing. That's the type of an experience that I like to have and participate in. So if I'm not doing that, I don't feel like I'm even living. I have to be breathing life into somebody or encouraging someone or something like that. So I think that radical self-awareness helps you identify the lane and the roles and the language and the relationships and various things that you really need to stay in. Not that you can't dip your toe in some other water, but it helps you to navigate the seat in the bus, maybe in the organization as a CEO, very clearly, very empoweringly that you need to remain in, and then find people to sit in those other seats. But if you're burned out, that's just a clue. There's nothing wrong with you. It's just a clue that you're probably operating in a capacity that it's not necessarily real tied to your core.
And going back to what we said before, it's a symptom of a potential disorder.
It's out of,
Out
yeah.
of order. Well, David, I worked with musicians when I had a studio in the late 90s. And then in around 2008, around the housing crisis, the worst time to open an art gallery. I had an art gallery. And
Oh,
for an
wow.
for Army guy to open an art gallery, that's a funny story in and of itself.
That's awesome.
But I've worked around creatives a lot. And another thing that really magnetized me to your story is you're a singer, not just any old singer. I presume that you're classically trained because the power of your voice, the notes that you're able to hit, you're singing very difficult songs in another language other than what they were written in. Open Arms, what
Yeah.
comes to mind, and you did it in English and Italian. I thought this guy's really showing up, but it was an amazing performance, and I love that. But a lot of the people that I worked with were either really, really left brain, like me, very practical, nuts and bolts, or their house was painted 10 different colors and they spent 6 hours every morning looking for their cell phone. I mean, it was, the skill sets are radically different, but here you are as a, excuse me, as a performing musician as part of your career. And then you have this inventor line in your career as well. So I get the sense that you're probably one of those rare people that you can harness both the creative and the very, very practical, because you don't strike me as the type of guy who wakes up and looks for his phone for 6 hours. You seem like you've got it very much together. So it's unusual
Well,
for creative talent and practicality to inhabit the same person.
man, well, thank you for the kind words there. Truth of the matter is I can get up in the morning and be a big hot mess just like everybody else and get all distracted. And so here's something else though. I'll tell a quick story that'll paint this picture well. When I first joined the ISI Mastermind, the same day, another guy, so my last name is Ask, A-S-K, right? Well, another guy joined David Ash. So David Ask and David Ash joined. They actually thought it was a mistake with the onboarding and got our paperwork mixed up. And what was interesting though is as I got to know him, and he's just become a dear friend, he actually looked at me one day and he said, as he was helping me kind of understand some identity issues for myself, he said, David, you don't get it, do you? You don't sing because you're a musician. You don't create products for Home Depot and Lowe's because you're an inventor. He said, you do everything for two reasons, for inspiration and for people. And it was fascinating. He nailed it. Like for me as a creative, I don't care if I'm creating thermostat guards or I'm writing songs or I'm standing in front of people at the Skirmerhorn Symphony Center at downtown Nashville, Tennessee, and I'm creating goosebumps for people. I love to create moments and memories and headspaces that cause people to look up and look within and to realize that there's way more going on. There's way more possible. And so I'm not a super left-brained kind of a guy. In fact, if I don't feel some inspiration in the morning, I'm going to create it because I got to have some fuel to remember to run on. I'm much more of a right-brained creative than I am, maybe on face value on LinkedIn that people would think I'm kind of a, you know, inventor, CEO kind of a person.
Well, it's interesting, David. You were really the one that took the bull by the horns, so to speak, as far as the invention is concerned. And from what I understand, you guys have the first and presumably only, this is, what is the best way to call it? A thermostat guard with a combination lock. That's what really changed, because
Yes.
before it was keys, people were losing the keys. And like a good entrepreneur, the moment we realize something doesn't exist that should, and I have that line in my book that boom,
Yeah.
there's this, oh, okay, well, we need to come up with this. Now, I know that that was a harrowing story because there's intellectual properties, there's creation. You talked about this in other interviews about injection molding and all the manufacturing and the complexities. What I'd like to get for the audience, because we actually have an inventor in the chat with us right now, Mike
Oh, good.
from Pascagoula, to the inventors out there, David, can you speak to them at least just one or two lessons that if you could have a time machine or if you were on stage consulting with a room full of inventors, what are the two biggest lessons you got out of that experience? Because you basically lived the dream that a lot of them want. You got your product into the big box stores.
Oh man, and it took years. So to your point, my brother, so technically the first version was not my idea. Like he called me one day and said, "Where do I get a stat guard with a combo lock?" And
Uh,
we ended up kind of building this together and so on. So he was really the genesis of that. Since then, I've got two different versions and just licensed another one called the Lockbox Pro that has a combination lock with a key to Linux and so on. But to your question, what two pieces of advice? I would say brace yourself. This idea that, if you build it, they will come, just not true. And so I would say have a really gracious, sober understanding of how these things kind of happen and take place. And so I would say get your patent, right? If you know you can get a patent, I mean, get it. If you can get a trademark, get it, because it's going to give you a lot of psychological peace as you go start knocking on doors. And then surround yourself with people who can help you. And I don't care if that's with capital that you might need or you, and in my case, it was funny, by the way, when Home Depot first called, we got on their website first and they said, we'll test you in some stores. And they had some staff changes. And the new guy didn't really want much to do with me right
Oh
away because he
no.
was just figuring out how to do his job. So we waited another 2 years to get the opportunity to get on the shelf. So that was a tough time because I had my hopes up when we first had that first conversation and got on the website.
And you had huge inventory. I remember because you did the
Yeah,
classic thing that a lot of authors did, like let's say self-published authors 10 years ago. They'd buy a pallet of books
right.
and then it sits in the garage for 3 years, then it becomes firewood. But you actually had this, and it's a pretty normal thing to do. You had this massive amount of inventory, but
Yeah.
eventually you were able to move it.
Yeah.
Was it just persistence that got the door open at Home Depot? What was the
In essence, yes. Yeah. I mean, it takes forever. The sales cycle in working with some of these big corporations is just so long, right? The decisions that they make are usually on an annual basis. If they have a planogram for an aisle, they change things up. We just had a conversation a couple months ago with Ace Hardware, and they love the StatGuard Plus, but they're like, hey, David, we're going to start looking at this in our next planogram. So it might be another year before we get an
wow.
opportunity. So I think the expectations need to be set and then surround yourself with people that can kind of help you and navigate some of those waters. I ended up partnering with a company to license it. So they are technically the vendor of record with Home Depot and Lowe's. And Home Depot and Lowe's have each have their own unique unit. But you might imagine, I didn't have the capital to stock the shelves in 2,000 stores once, let alone keep another 30,000 units sitting around and understand supply chain. And so just because I invented a product doesn't mean that I understand supply chain and warehousing and shipping and the whole nine yards. Like it's
That's why
and
those guys go to Shark Tank a lot of times, right? So
well,
they
they do.
expand their manufacturing. And what I didn't want to miss out on the great opportunity to talk about your second book, The Guardians of Grit. And
Yeah.
when can we expect it? Is that going to be Amazon? Is it going to be a paperback? Tell us a little bit about that.
I'm not 100% sure. I just sent it to my editor and we're going to knock on some doors and see if we can get a publisher to pick it up.
Oh,
um,
okay, great.
just to help get a little bit more of a reach. I'm actually launching a podcast of my own, a YouTube channel and so on here in the next month or so. It's a mission for me. I'm so grateful for my dad. This book is for fathers and sons. I'm kind of niching down and so on. And of course, I have a son and a daughter, and my daughter melts my heart, of course. But I thought, you know what? I'm going to write a book for fathers and sons and try to start building some scaffolding, if you will, for dads to understand that internal constitution and how do they identify those things for themselves so that they can help identify those things, in their sons. So their sons don't walk around with a big question mark inside that they feel and everybody else feels for that matter. I'll kind of paint the picture this way. So my favorite quote, and it kind of sums up the book in so many ways. It's by Benjamin Disraeli. He's a former PM of England back in the day. And he said that the greatest good you can do for another is not to share with him your riches, but to reveal to him his own. And I just love the fact that, we have a fingerprint that's unique, right? A retina that's unique, a DNA that is wildly unique. And I feel like, wow, there's another clue. And if we just start drilling into how my uniqueness can impact the person next to me inside of their uniqueness and how we're all kind of tied together, right? I mean, it just starts to get really glorious as opposed to what I think many live with is just a really vague understanding of themselves and others in the world we live in. So I like to drill into the details.
Well, now in modern times we have mastermind groups, and obviously that's part and parcel to our organization. It's in our name, because the thing that I've seen, and I don't know if this has come up on past interviews, and this is something we could do maybe once you start your podcast, have me on and we'll talk about it. Because when I was a kid, we had Cub Scouts, we had Eagle Scouts, we even had more. The Shriners are still pretty big where I'm from, and we have a few other organizations. But my grandfather was in the Honorable Order of Odd Fellows, and there were all of these massive fraternal organizations
Yeah.
when I was very young. They're almost all gone. I've checked their building every time I go back to Louisville, Kentucky, and the
Nobody
door is
there.
always locked. I can't find. So
Uh,
these organizations are going away. Obviously, the Boy Scouts went through they fell apart for, again, that could be its own episode. So there really isn't anything out there for young men. Even you and I, we have mastermind groups that we belong to so that we can still commune with other men. There's something about kind of sitting at a table, breaking bread, sharing
Oh
ideas.
yeah. Yeah,
And
great.
young men, we don't have anything like that. I mean, unless there's a church group, if you've got a good youth pastor, there's
Yeah.
probably some activities there. But are there any organizations for young men that you recommend that can kind of help mentor them?
Yeah.
Because there's that age
That's
where young men don't want to be around. Dad's not cool anymore. And that's the
yeah, yeah.
critical period.
Yeah, you know what? I'll be honest. I think I'm going to refrain from recommending anything right now. A few come to mind, but I've not researched them enough to know that I would want to put my stamp on it. I mean, there's so many great organizations out there, people doing all kinds of great work. But I love what you mentioned there with regards to sitting at a table with our peers, right? I think that some of the things that we maybe visualize or dream about, or maybe in movies or books or fairy tales with regards to knights at the round table and all that type of a paradigm. I think that's way more true, to our essence than a lot of things. So I think that even God's word says, in the counsel of many, there's safety, right? So I think that's a law like gravity. I think that when we enter into those paradigms with those that we respect and we sit in their counsel and so on, there's something that happens there that is just more than information. And I think there's something so core to our souls that is really rich and good and causes us and compels us to live higher. And I think that those organizations, and the opposite of that is isolation, right? And those who get isolated end up just completely wiping out. So I think that that sense of community is vital.
And I always think of it as it multiplies. So two people, it isn't one and one because two people working together is more powerful than the number of two. I talked to a friend of mine about particularly like when I was in the military and if we were going through something, I wasn't in combat, but I
All
put
right.
into some pretty difficult circumstances and the ability to push through really major obstacles when you've got other people cheering or even kind of joking with each other. There's a lot more power in the room, even if you've got five
Yep.
men sitting at a table. It's more than the power of five men because there's something else that happens there. I think perhaps it might be the Holy Spirit coming in. I
Yeah.
don't know. I don't understand that stuff as well as other people, but there seems to be some other force,
No
positive
question.
force involved that just magnifies the ability of that group of people. And I encourage men and women to get together, women to get together, because that combination, that mixing of ideas is just, I think it's fantastic. And of course, we've seen in the last couple of years, not enough people are always looking for ways to exclude people out of their
Yeah.
personal circle. And we really need to bring more people back into the fold because I'll tell you what, I've never learned anything good with my mouth open. I've always learned best when my mouth was closed and somebody else was
Well, isn't
sharing
it
some
funny?
wisdom.
Like, I remember when I joined ISI, the thing that pushed me over the edge was Aaron Walker, who started it, looked at me and he said, David, you don't know what you don't know. And I was like, well, I guess I'm in. Like, I mean, it was so obvious that I needed to surround myself with wiser people. That's all there was to it. And my life has, been better for it. That's all there is to it.
And David, do you have a hard date for Guardians of Grit?
I wish I did. I don't.
No, a lot
Yeah.
of people. One thing I didn't look up, and of course I'll do that as soon as this is over. Like yesterday, I had a great guy from Mendham, New Jersey, Ryan Ross, on, and he is a triathlete. He's got a book that's going to roll out on the 13th, but because he had also published before,
Yeah.
I followed him on Amazon, and you can follow me as an author on. So if I do any of the things in the future, so if you've got an author's page, or if you don't, I
Yeah.
would encourage you to do that because I can click follow and follow you on Amazon, and that way I'll know when your print book comes out. And if you decide to do
Okay.
an audio book, it'll alert me too. The best thing is for me to be kind of a subscriber. In
Sure.
other ways, maybe on your newsletter. Can you give us all the different ways people can reach out? Because of course I see you've got a couple of websites here: Lockbox Pro, StatGuard Plus. Which one seems to be like a company name, and the other one is the product name? Did I get that right?
Well, they're actually two different products.
Oh, they're
Yeah.
two
So
different products. Okay.
yeah, so Lockbox Pro is for the Pro channel. That'll be in supply houses. And right now it's in Granger and HD Supply and Johnstone and things like that. And the StatGuard Plus is in Home Depot and Lowe's and hopefully Ace Hardware soon. And, I would say if somebody wants to get a hold of me, let's say go to davidmusic.com and
Okay.
just check out some music. And if it gives you goosebumps, and I always like to say, if I can do anything for you, no strings attached, send me a message. You can contact me on the website there.
And fantastic vocal performances, David. I was just blown away. And, I was around a lot of people in the musical industry in San Antonio in the late 90s. And
Yeah.
the singing is something that I appreciate how much work it takes to hone a voice like yours. And I can tell you put in a lot of discipline and a lot of work. And I really appreciate you coming on. Was there anything I left on the table, anything you wanted to cover that we didn't?
You know what? I'm going to just give you a compliment. I've been on about 65 podcasts in
Oh
the
my
last
goodness.
year,
Oh my goodness.
and you are the most engaging and prepared. And I can't tell you how much that means because
Thank you so much.
if someone's going to ask some time from someone else, you would think that they would put a little time in and be prepared and so on. And it's amazing how many times I show up to do something like this and it's really awkward. And you can tell they're just not quite in it that day. So I just so appreciate you being full of heart, full of mind, and this was really enjoyable. So thank you.
It means the world to me. Hopefully, when you start your podcast, I'd love to come on. Again, there are
Yeah,
a lot of narrative thread lines that we can pull at on this, David. There's
sure.
so much more to talk about intellectual properties, more the backstory about Home Depot, how you became such an amazing singer, and the narrative arc of that journey as well. So thank you so much, David. I appreciate it. And I'll be looking out to find out when that book, The Guardians of Grit, comes out.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much.